In this video, we're going to explore the 4 steps that I feel are required to sharpen your plane blades and your chisels to the perfect edge that you possibly can. This is not as much of a how-to video as it is a what and why video, so that hopefully at the end of this you'll have a better understanding of why each one of these steps in this process is important, and then you can develop your own sharpening technique to achieve those. Step 1 is lapping the back of the blade. What this does is it achieves 2 things. One is it ensures that the back of that blade is as flat as you can possibly get it. That's important in plane blades because you have a chip breaker that's going to sit across here, and you want 0 tolerance for a gap in there. That'll wreak havoc on you. The other thing that this does is you want to polish the back of that to the highest grit that you're going to sharpen to. So if you're going to sharpen this blade using an 8,000 stone or a 16,000, you want to polish the back of that to that level. If you do not do that, let's say you think it's flat enough and you brought it to a 4,000 and that's polished enough, you might as well stop your sharpening at 4,000, because the edge of that blade will be no better than the lower grit. So even if you do one side to 4,000 and the other side to 16,000, that edge is only sharpened to a 4,000 grit level. Here are a couple examples of what I've already polished. On the chisels, you want to flatten and polish as far back as you can. This is where you'll find out where a quality chisel is and one that's not so good. Here's a plane blade. You really only need about an inch or 3/4 across here. Here's one I've been working on for a period of time, and as you can tell from the scratch pattern, here's this area right here is my 1,000 grit. You can tell where I've not really gotten across the edge of this in these corners. You'll never be able to sharpen that edge to a high quality unless you have this flat all the way up to the front. The process of lapping the back of that starts out, typically I start with 1,000. You're going to grip the blade on the chisel so that your finger will stop the blade from hitting the stone and rising up on the handle. You don't want anything, you want this absolutely flat. So what I do is I just grip it to where I want it to stop. I put my pressure on these 2 fingers here on the middle, and I just go across this stone, and I try to keep that even. And periodically, I'll turn the stone around so I wear it evenly. Depending on how much work you have to do on this, depends on whether you need to go back and flatten that stone. But as soon as you see that scratch pattern go all the way to the edge that you're going to be sharpening to, you can move on to the next grit. And this is a once and done process. You don't have to do it every time you sharpen anything. Now that we've lapped the back of our blade and we're ready to go ahead and move forward, eventually you're going to have to go ahead and grind or somehow put a primary bevel on that edge. To do that, I use a 8-inch variable speed grinder with a 180 grit CBN wheel. This is probably the only process in this that you could actually damage a blade in. If you have the luxury of owning a Tormac, that greatly reduces that because it's water cooled. But what I do is I slow the speed down about halfway, and I keep a dish of water there to quench the blade frequently. So be careful, especially if you're just using aluminum oxide wheels. It's easy to burn one. That removes the temper out of it, and basically the blade won't hold an edge as well as it should. When grinding that, what I'm doing is I like to grind mine about 5 degrees less than what my target sharpening angle is. So if my target is a 30-degree sharpening angle, I'll probably do my primary at 25 degrees. So this would be 25 degrees. The reason for that is when I go to do my 30 degrees, I'm just taking this very tip off of here. So sharpening is removing material. The less you have to remove, the more efficient your process is going to be. Now, there are some instances where you may need to grind to the angle that you're going to sharpen to. And one of the instances for me is I have some Boggs spoke shave blades that are too short to put into a sharpening jig. So I want this grind to be what my target sharpening angle is, and that way I can freehand this by referencing both of these ends on the stone and keeping that blade consistent to that angle. Other than that, I grind below what my target is and just remove the end of that. One of the things I like to do is if I have been sharpening this and I've reached a point where I feel like it's time for me to regrind, what I typically do is I regrind, and I regrind that to where I have just a little bit of that original polish left on there. I don't take it all the way to the edge unless I have some damage that I'm trying to remove. And of course, that's a different situation. If you have a big old hunk taken out of there, you need to remove it, and grinding's the quickest way. So I'll show you an example of the point where I typically consider regrinding to go ahead and move forward. So at the point where I feel like it needs to be ground, if my camera will focus in, here we are with my final grind and the point that I bring that to. But before we move on to the honing process and putting that edge on our blade, I'd like to discuss a little bit about some tools you might want to have on your sharpening bench at all times. One is some sort of magnification. These are cheap. This is a jeweler's loop I found at Harbor Freight for like $7. It'll go up to like 16.5 times magnification. I recommend from 10 to 15, somewhere in that range. It'll give us plenty of magnification to see what's going on with that edge through your sharpening process. The other thing I'm going to talk about, hit on a little bit, here's my collection of sharpening jigs. I've had major issues with all of these. None of these will hold the different blades that I have. I've got shoulder plane blades, the bigger scraper plane blades, and so on and so forth. Most of these have an issue with chisels because chisels are more or less a wedge shape and they'll come out of it. And the biggest issue I've had with most of them is not being able to efficiently set an angle and just go to sharpening. So after all the frustration with those sharpening jigs, I ended up developing my own. And the concept behind this is I wanted something that I could quickly set an angle and just get to work. I don't want a bunch of things on my bench. I just want one that'll cover everything. And this seems to do that. So it's a ring on bearings so that it actually rides on the stone. It won't gouge it out. And what this does is it allows me to control my sharpening process. So when I come over here, let's say I'm going to freshen this blade up, I can have this set at 30 degrees. I can set my blade in here and I'm ready to go to the stones. So it's that quick, it's that easy. This holds very well. I don't need to put a death grip on anything. I don't need to clamp it in there because most of the pressure that I'm putting on here is going to be on the edge I'm sharpening. I'm not pushing on the wheel. This is just a guide. I also developed a part of this to go ahead and put plane blades in here. This is toolless, so all I'm doing is hand pressure on here, and that holds and grips that blade to be able to go through the sharpening process. And I still have control of this on putting cambers and things on the edges of my plane blades. So that was my solution to being dissatisfied with other products that were available. If you're interested in this, I'll leave a link to the website. These are made to order. I produce them here in my shop. And if you do visit our site, our ordering process is basically put in a request that you're interested in and what you're interested in. And I'll receive an email for that. I'll reply to that email on whether I have it available or when it will be available. And when it is available, you'll receive a payment request through PayPal. So it's a little bit different, but this is kind of more or less a hobby, and it worked so well for me that I decided I would make it marketable and let other people try it and see if they overcome some of the dissatisfaction of what's available currently on the market. Let's move on to the honing process. So we've already discussed our primary bevel. So here's our blade, our primary bevel. I typically do to minus 5 degrees or thereabouts of what my target is. So we have a secondary bevel, which is typically what we're taking off in the honing process. Now there are people that do a tertiary. Which is just a third. And what they'll do is after they've established a secondary is they'll just go and take a little notch off the end a couple degrees above that secondary. So to explain why people do this, we'll go ahead and start here. So whenever you hone or sharpen this edge, what you're doing is you're producing a burr on the end of that. This is a little bit exaggerated, but to make the point. The lower the grit, the bigger the burr. So the challenge in the sharpening process is how to remove that burr without damaging the edge any more than you want, or at all. So we've seen a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it too, is they'll go through 1,000 grit, put that secondary on there, turn the blade over and say, now remove the burr, and they'll rake it backwards on the stone. What you risk on doing is actually breaking that burr, and then what you've done is put yourself back in a situation where you have a dull blade again. So another tip, as you go through this process, we make a habit of viewing our process from this plane right here. That'll look like a perfect edge every time, and you'll think you're doing good. What you need to do is view that from your back of your blade, and what you'll do is you'll end up seeing if there's any damage right there. So just as a habit, it's probably more important that you view your progress from the back side of that blade to see if you've broken anything or what the progress of that burr is. So back on dealing with the burr. So there's a couple of ways to address this, and we'll look at it when we get over there. One is, after you have developed that burr across there, is move to your next grit. First, inspect this to make sure that your scratch pattern from that grit you've been working goes all the way across the blade. The next one is, if you move up a grit, let's say you start at 1,000, then move up to 4,000 or 6,000, is work that blade to the point where that burr actually gets worked off of there. And you'll notice this, you may see pieces of that burr on your stone. You can inspect it and see the pieces hanging on there. But keep in mind, even though that burr is gone, what you've developed is just a smaller burr. So then you have to go through your next grit until that is removed. And you'll continue to create a burr on that edge, whether you can see it or not. As you go through that, working those stones, there will be a burr on that edge. I have actually tried to remove this by putting the back on my highest grit and working it out very lightly. Don't know what the best option is right now. If you work it off through the grits of the stone, that's a little bit time consuming. And hence this will bring into the tertiary, is when you have that worked up, if you pick this up a couple degrees and do your tertiary, you're probably going to remove that off of there for the most part. I've not done a lot of tertiary sharpening. I plan on experimenting with that. And I'll bring up my sharpening jig will allow me to do that effortlessly. So that's the concept behind the different grinds in honing. Now, there are other methods people use, and one is they freehand, and what they do is a figure 8 pattern or a back and forth rocking, but what they're doing is they're actually working this in a rounded shape for that edge. And I'm not saying this doesn't work, but what you're doing is you're removing all this material across here. And that's, to me, time consuming. But anyway, that's what they're doing. So there's a lot of options to sharpening and honing. It's just a matter of which one you're comfortable with. So here we are back at my bench. So I'm going to start at a 28 degree. And what I have here is my shafting 1,000 and a 16,000. I'm actually curious to see how the tertiary works with removing a burr. So I'm going to set up my 28 degree. And I'm just going to work this till I develop that burr across there, and I've got my good scratch pattern all the way across. I've got that burr developed. So now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move up to 30 degrees. I'm going to go straight to my 16,000 and see how this works out for me. This is all the edge you need on a sharp blade. Just a thin. Okay, we've got our nice pretty edge on there. We think we about got it. But one more step, stropping. I use a wooden block, and the reason why I don't use leather, well, there's a couple reasons. One, you wear it out and you have to replace it. And the other thing that happens is when you're stropping with leather, say this is your blade, and here's your leather underneath here. This has a tendency to push down. So what I feel is better, because I've already taken all the time to flatten the back of this, and it may not be quite as important on a plain blade, but this is important on a chisel, is that if you strop with leather, eventually you'll be, and this is exaggerated, you will be curving up the edge of that blade like that. I don't want that on my chisels. Don't want it on my plain blades. So as you strop with leather, and even with a wooden block, you will do a little bit of this, and this will be very evident, especially over a period of time, is that both of those planes will start to curve in. Does a good job at removing the burr, but that's a situation. That is a condition that extensive stropping will do to your blade. So I use wood. Charge the block with I use 1/2 micron diamond paste, and it seems to work well. But you also have to have a technique for stropping. I've seen people with the leather put the blade in there and push it down and just keep breaking it and flipping it back and forth. And there's other techniques where they say lightly do this, because again, you don't want to break the burr off, you want to work it off. So, and again, I'm just explaining this so that you can develop your own technique. Maybe you can just put all your weight into it and remove it, and you'll have the perfect edge. That's up for you. That is for you to determine and decide on what your technique will be. Here's my stropping block. I've made a nice little case for it. Try to keep contaminants off of it. And this is just a block of maple. Probably 2 by 3.5 or 4 by 8 or 10, whatever you want to make it. One of the things I like about this is if I start gouging this out real bad, or it gets contaminated or bad in any way, I can just take a scraper plane or a smoothing plane or whatever. I can plane that layer off of there, make it nice and flat and smooth again, and then start over. So what we do is, this is 1/2 micron diamond paste, and it doesn't take much. This is already charged, but we'll demonstrate. Just a little dot of diamond paste. A little squirt of WD-40. Then we're going to work this into the block. And even after it's charged, all you have to do, if it dries out, is maybe a little squirt of WD-40 to lube it back up, and you're good to go. So now that we've charged that back up, we're going to do very lightly go back and forth on this blade. Alright, hopefully I've explained this good enough for you to understand, and maybe you'll leave this video moving forward with your technique and developing one that works very well for you. If you are a skeptic of any of these steps, do yourself a favor and follow through with this. A lot of people probably don't want to spend the time lapping the back of their chisel, or they say, well, I bought it and they say it comes out of the box, you know, usable out of the box, but it's not polished to the level that you probably should. So if you're a skeptic, take one of your tools and try it and see what difference it makes. I think you'd be surprised. And like I said, lapping is a once and done deal. So after you're done, you may put it on the back every now and then just to get a few scratches out, but it's not a process you need to do every time you sharpen. Most of your sharpening is maintenance. So I don't beat on my tools with hammers and stuff to take chunks out so I can impress people on how quick you can bring it back to life. So if you get familiar with the step-by-step process, lapping is a once and done deal. Grinding is an occasional thing. And then typically you're just honing and stropping. So I think you'll be impressed with the difference that this makes, and I wish you good luck in the process, and go find your own technique that works for you. I've been developing mine over the past year. I'll probably still make some changes. Like I said, this video was the first one that I tried the tertiary sharpening method. It may be something hopeful in my future. It may not be. I just have to mess around and see what difference it makes in my work. So hopefully I was helpful, and I hope to see you on the next video I put out there. If you're not subscribed, please do so. If you're interested in my freestyle edge, go to the website and consider purchasing one. There's a little bit of a learning curve to it, but what doesn't have a learning curve? I think you'll be happy with how efficiently this system works, and the flexibility and all the things that you can do with it. So thanks for watching again. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next video.